All right, gang, we are still trying to catch up from doing Project Lightning, but there's still more to talk about because after it's all said and done, after Ian's already left, we still had to film B-roll and prep footage and yada yada. And part of that meant that we had to go back and reservice the guns. And for that, we have our resident gunsmith, Mark Novak of Anvil Gunsmithing. Hi, Mark.
That would be me. Hello, sir.
So Mark's agreed to sit down in the studio and give us an after-action report on how the heck these guns did, in his opinion, as the field mechanic, as it were.
Right.
And so we're just going to take some time, break them down, and look at each gun one by one and get his assessment as to whether or not he thinks it was a good system for the Great War, or even something that you can collect without going insane and pulling all your hair out. So let's get into it.
Well, right off the bat, we have the Hotchkiss partitive.
Now, this was the problem child for the entire series.
Yeah.
However, in terms of actual performance, it did much better than you think. This is the gun that emotionally, you get more and more upset at it because it's the gun that frustrates you. It requires
It should be that gun, but it just isn't.
low recoil,
Right?
easily controlled on target. However, mild 303 cartridge in this case, not mild, but for the weight. And then, everybody kind of fussed at us, by the way, about this bipod or tripod here. Mark, did you want to show the audience what it is that everybody wanted us to do desperately? I can give you a hand here.
Right. Everybody wanted it mounted up here. There are reasons why we did not.
There we go.
There are reasons why we did not. And it's because there's no identifiable evidence that it was ever used up there.
So the problem is you have the Mark I Star tends to get mounted here. The earlier cavalry tends to be mounted up here with a totally different bipod system. So yes, we can move this further forward and we get some more control, but the problem is it doesn't add much stability. We're still wiggling like crazy. And now we've lost our traverse, like not nearly as good as a traverse. And the problems we had with this gun had nothing to do with this being either further back or further forward. Like, we've tried it both ways, and we went with further back because it gave us more control of the gun. We had the problem with the 0815 of the central mount because the 0815 naturally wanted to rock, but this gun is very low recoil. Very, very low recoil.
It is, because it weighs so damn much. I mean, this is a very heavy piece of equipment. Before we ever actually got into running this thing on the range, though, there were several significant problems with it as delivered. It was out of headspace. It had been gone after with a Dremel tool at some time in the past. And the gas system, which I've left loose here so that I can stand a chance of taking it apart while we're in here, the gas system had to be dynamited apart. And I mean, this thing was screwed from my thumb all the way to the top. It required me to soak it in a tub of kerosene for 2 weeks before I was able to get it back apart again. And then it required me to actually tip the entire weapon up vertically, clamp that in my vise, and use the gun as the wrench to get it apart just to make it run.
Now, the interesting thing about that is this is not the only Hotchkiss we've handled. We've handled 2 big old 1914 models, episode on that very, very soon, as a matter of fact. And they have the same sort of gas plug, but much larger.
Huge.
All of them have been frozen.
Every single one of them has.
Because if you own a Hotchkiss, here's the thing. When you're done shooting it, not only do you have to disassemble this thing right away, you're going to need to scrub the ever-loving crap out of this. So I imagine that in the field, in the war, that part was when you are out of action, the minute the gun is no longer running. Now, the good thing is, this thing can get crudded up real good. The gun will still run.
It'll still run, and here's why.
You just can't adjust the pressure.
Well, here's why. This is not a typical gas adjusting port. This is an expansion chamber up here. And the further out this is, the more the gases have time to expand before they push the action rearward.
You hear that, guys, with loud motorcycles and low horsepower.
Yes, right, right, absolutely. If it doesn't blat, it's not big enough. This expansion chamber, the further out this plug goes, the slower the gun runs. And it's exactly the reverse of what you would think it would be. This is not cutting off gas, it's giving it more room to go. So the further in this thing goes, the harder the gun should run. And it's unique, and they're both like that. And so the entire inside of this thing fills up full of burnt powder gases and just turns into an absolute mess. And of course, all of the moisture has been burned out of it and all the oil's been burned off of it, so it turns red.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And by the way, if you see a Hotchkiss in this condition, don't get mad at the owner. The sort of, like, I mean, we're talking about like nylon brushes, brass picks, like trying to get every bit of crevice out of that thing, or it is going to bind.
I had to drive the pin out, and I actually pulled the center stud out of this thing because that was the only way. I've actually had the bell off the outside of it. It was the only way. I had to do it to both of them.
Oh.
If you look on my Instagram, you'll see I've got a photograph in there, this whole thing disassembled, and it's ugly. You can't do it in the field.
Now, this design dates back to about 1896.
Oh, absolutely.
As a gas piston.
Right.
Which is incredible.
And you got to consider the propellants they were using back then were not as clean as some of the
Well, they were testing it. This gun can only exist after smokeless. And they tested it with black powder. As a matter of fact, we saw that in, I believe, the Norwegian trials. They tried it in 10.12.
That had to have been a disaster.
They couldn't get it to work because it just would foul up within 100 shots.
Right.
So this is a smokeless only system. So they knew that there was a fouling risk. I imagine this was a part that they took care of very clearly. But everything else about the gun, this is very interesting. Everything else about the gun doesn't really heat up, doesn't really foul up, doesn't really have any problems.
Nope, there was no wear back here. There's a head spacing ring right here that someone had gone after the inside of with a Dremel tool.
To be fair, they may have been trying to fix a problem that's inherent to the design, which again is that it is very easy because of the quick change barrel with a wrench.
Right.
That you can work this gun at a headspace because resetting the barrel counts for a lot.
It
and
does.
That was a very common field complaint is that the gun would start malfunctioning.
Right.
Well, really what it was is they hadn't set down the new barrel.
Right.
And it's not as firm of a twist. It's not an interrupted screw. You just and it's locked in.
It's a feel thing, and it's supposed to stop up here on these detents. And you can see that it's been over rotated almost one entire turn to get it to take all the slop out of it. It's not a very intuitive. The whole gun is unintuitive. There's nothing intuitive about how this thing operates. You saw all the problems they had with it. I had a hard time operating it. They took a rather, what's the word I'm looking for? Ergonomically interesting system and flipped it upside down and backwards. So now you've got
inverted the locking system.
And it's a blivet. I got to tell you, it's a blivet.
We're going to have a lot on this very, very soon, probably next episode.
Yeah.
But the Hotchkiss is an 1896, one of the original piston-driven guns. As a matter of fact, at that time, think about it.
Right.
The 1895 Potato Digger had just come out the year before.
Right.
And it was running a lever gas piston. Like, it's a lever system instead of an actual gas piston. So this is like the first successful gas piston gun when it was the model 1896 to 1900.
Right.
And then what they did is, by 1909, they managed to take this system and flip the feed system upside down, which is already weird enough, just to save the space and weight.
Right.
But then in doing that, they put a cam on the outside to run all this stuff. And then they took the locking system, which normally, the bolt head's supposed to go in their shoulder.
Right.
They took that and they're like, well, let's go with rotating, but we don't want to rotate the bolt. So we'll create this furniture inside that's like...
There's a rotating ring inside here that when the bolt comes forward, it rotates the ring inside of the receiver housing, but on the outside of the bolt.
Yeah. Which is...
dirt, oil.
I was amazed it did not foul, though.
I was, because very little dirt got back in here, because by the time this thing unlocks, there's almost nothing coming back in the action.
Which is brilliant.
It is.
So that means that's why this gets so dirty, is what should have gone back there.
Goes up here. Right.
So, beautiful design, though.
Yeah, heavy.
And performed better than our expectations. Emotionally, you're just like, what is this horrible thing?
Right.
But you get on the range and it actually does pretty good.
Until it gets dark.
Yeah, that is true.
And then you're toast. But from an after-action standpoint, this came apart a lot easier this time.
Well, Crozier said that there was no gun out there that could be run in the dark. I mean, essentially. He had a quote, I'd have to look up the exact quote, but he said, there's no gun in our inventory that you can run without the use of daylight. And it's like, that's not good, man. Don't say that publicly. But
when they'll attack at night.
This is not a gun I want to feel my way around on.
Yeah. One mag and you're done. One strip and you're done. One whatever and you're done.
Strips. What do we do for strip prep, by the way?
Well, there is a strip healer that goes along with this gun that bends all the tabs back over. I took the twist out of a couple of them, but basically the strips were the strips are actually not a half bad way to do this.
I only found 2 critical problems. And one of the things is it may just be that we don't have the proper loader. We showed on the preview video of Mark using the drill on it. That is actually set up for, I believe, 8mm Mauser.
8 Mauser,
So it can't actually feed the 303. We just put 8 Mauser in it so you could see the system working.
Right.
In reality, we had to hand fit all these.
Every one of them.
So the problem is there's a number of clips on the strip, and we'll put some visuals to help you see it.
Right.
But the healer fixes the middle row, which is 90% of your problem. But every once in a while, one of the outside tabs would get loose, and we'd have a twisted cartridge jam. And then the other big one is if any of the leading edges got tabbed over, the leading edges have to be level. They cannot be warped or twisted, because by the time you get them lined up in there, if you got any sort of like weight to one side or the other action, it ties up the feed again.
There are 2 fingers sitting in here. Whoops! I don't want to wear this. There are 2 fingers sitting in here that the strip goes under and the cartridge goes over. And if there's any disruption in that leading edge, it's horrible. And there's no way to get out of it. And God forbid if you drop one of those things. It was bad enough dropping them on a dirty floor.
Yeah. In theory, we can press this button here, push it up, and pull the strip back out to clear jam. In practice, a partial feed is your nightmare.
Yeah.
Not as nightmarish as a double feed on the Lewis, but
You're not
close.
taking it apart in heavy duty combat.
Yeah.
It is what
you
it
are
is.
if you're in Columbus. That was the Pancho Villa raid, which, that gave this thing a very bad taste in the American mouth. But
it's not a good thing.
Overall, performed much better than I thought. All these things about how terrible they are at breaking parts and things like that. We had, while May was using it from the hip, somebody had snagged, the way this engages over top on this spring, it had just gotten loose. Nothing broke. It just had slipped off.
Right.
And when she fired, it popped loose.
Right.
And so that's like the worst thing in terms of parts breakage that we had on this gun. That and a little piece of leather that held on the cross key managed to get snagged and snapped somewhere along the way, but that's just a piece of leather. So realistically, when we talk about these guns being the guns that break all the time, some of that might have actually been Colt's fault, because it's the Colt ones that broke all the time. The British one seems to be doing just fine.
It seems to be doing just great. Yeah, like I was starting to say before, from an after-action standpoint, clean this, it's ready to rock again. Nice. Clean this heel to feed strips, man. It's ready to go.
That's good, because I got to take it over the range. We got episodes to do.
Hoorah.
Now, we did not unpack every gun and pack it into this room again. Sorry. Some notable ones are here because I'm going to refilm them, but mostly they're staying in Mark's care until they're ready to get filmed for a special primer, and then they're back to their owners. The BAR, we already did a primer. It's already home, so...
It's gone.
Yeah. But do you want to talk about all the mechanical difficulties you had with that gun?
Let's see. The BAR showed up here and it ran, which is rare. It ran, and then it left here running. So pretty much, it was the only one in here that ran like green corn through a goose. I mean, it just worked. It worked all the time. And I don't know what else to tell you other than the fact that,
That's the second 1918 BAR that I've laid hands on, and both of them... Not that their owners abused them or anything, but they just treated them like you would treat a rifle. They treated them well.
Right.
They didn't go nuts. They, a little lube, a little like not letting the fouling build up on the gas system and things like that. But nobody's religious about these things.
It's
and yet,
every John Browning designed weapon ever made. It's just correct.
Yeah. So we made a big deal about not being able to take it apart. I don't know that you need to very often.
I didn't see the need. I got to see it when it showed up. And it was fine. It was well lubricated. It was clean. Everything was good. It ran like a scalded dog. And honestly, I had about 30 seconds with it, and then it disappeared out of my sight. So I don't really know if there was much wrong with it, but it ran right up to the last shot. Rate of fire stayed the same. I didn't see anything wrong with it.
The only misfeeds we had were Ian throwing the switch by accident. Which
right.
He was so happy that it jammed. It did not jam.
It didn't jam.
So beautiful job on the BAR. We had one, I think in the outtakes, we had one incident where the second round didn't go off for Taylor, who owns CNS, which we should probably also plug.
Yeah.
There's been like 3 nights that he stayed up past midnight to let us work in that facility to get this filmed.
Night workout.
Yeah.
Like 1:30 in the morning, and that is above and beyond the call of someone volunteering their business that's got to open back up again at 8 o'clock in the morning.
And if you think about it, you can't run the range without running that air system that's money. So if you guys are in the Charleston area, do check out C&S and tell them that you appreciate it. That's something that they gifted to us and you all to enjoy. So when he ran the gun, the second round didn't go off, and some people might be concerned about that, but that was actually just ammo. So we checked it, just bad primer, I guess. So
I do want to mention one thing while we're here and talking about it. You ran steel case ammo. Ian specified steel case ammo, and I'm going to tell you what, this modern...
That's a different gun. Steel case wasn't in the BAR.
Oh, you guys didn't run steel through the BAR?
Not the BAR. That ran brass because it liked that big 150 grain.
Oh, well, then I brought that up out of sequence. I'm sorry.
We'll get around to that in just a moment, although you're giving away our next gun, I guess. So,
okay.
But BAR-wise, there was one major complaint that was across all of our videos in the series.
Can I bring it up?
Yeah, go for it.
That issue, BAR, doesn't have a bipod. It never came with a bipod. It wasn't equipped with a bipod. And I know we're at least 8 or 9 minutes into this video, so no one is watching the fact that I've said that it didn't have a bipod in World War I, so we ran it the way it ran in the war.
We've been getting a lot of that. Like, a lot
of it.
It's not fair that you didn't have the...
Yeah.
Why'd you take the bipod off the...
We didn't put it on.
Okay.
So we're done with that.
Mechanically, though, BAR just fine. I think over time you start to get a little fouling in the gas system, and the best part is it's an adjustable gas system with 3-position, pretty easily adaptable.
Right.
Like, that gun...
If you use it as an automatic rifle and not as a light machine gun, it's probably a lot better, and it'll just go and go and go and go.
Yeah, beautiful. All right, so we're on the topic. Let's skip ahead to the 30-06 show shot. And I know that seems out of sequence because we had the 1915 show shot.
Right.
And this is the 1918. But here's the curious thing. When we're talking about guns that ran really well without any problems whatsoever, BAR and 30-06 show shot.
30-06 show shot.
Which is just... If anything, should just tell you that we either have a sample size that's too small or history is recorded wrong. And by the way, we have sicked our friend Andrew on the 30-06 show shot. He's torn department records apart. Yes. And he said to me, I was on the phone with him, he said, Matthias, if you didn't physically have the GD gun, I would swear it never existed and it was a figment of people. He can't find a scrap of paper on it.
Right.
Nobody's sure of anything. So as much as we hear that it was terrible and that this and that and the other might not have run, it probably comes down to exactly what we were able to observe in this gun, which is what's the part that's critical on this gun to be fixed before you do anything?
Magazines, 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 and magazines. And I would have to tell you that I think part of why this gun ran so well is because it had its own in-flight missile technician going along with it. Okay, so every time that gun went out, we had verified lubrication on it. It was not hot. It was not dirty, but the magazines were full of this lunar regolith looking, this dust that they have out west where Ian lives. And so when I got all the magazines clean, got all the dents ironed out of all of them, we were able to get 15-round rips out of them pretty consistently.
Now imagine you're in the field though and you have those flimsy magazines in a pouch.
Yeah.
And you're having to transport them.
Most of the damage on the mags too were point impact dents where they had been dropped.
Right.
So once I pounded all the point impact dents up and got the followers to follow through, I made them absolutely bone dry. There was not a lick of oil in those things to pick any dirt up. And doing that, they ran. I did a video where I shot it. It's not as bad. I mean, its ergonomics are what its ergonomics were for when it was designed, but you get the mags right and the rest of the gun is pretty foolproof.
Now, the interesting thing is we've seen other countries adopt the show shot after World War I in rimless cartridges, and in every instance, they say they ran terrifically, that the show shot is a system that almost prefers rimless ammo to rimmed ammo.
It almost does. And something else you got to look at too, that 30-06 was throwing almost 60 grains less projectile.
Yeah.
The 8 show is people bag on the 8 Lebel. That is not a pansy round. That thing was hauling butt.
However, the recoil perceived was much worse on the 30-06, and I think that's just the pressure of the cartridge.
Yeah.
And I can't even figure out what else would have factored in, because you think it'd be close, but
100-year-old springs have a lot to do with it. Honestly, I am just absolutely pulling every string I have, trying to get a fresh set of springs wound for that gun. And I'd be willing to bet you the rate of fire is 200 rounds a minute faster.
Yeah, there's a certain manufacturer we've been talking to. So if you suddenly see a sponsor of sorts, it's because Mark has found a way to get springs made for some of these guns that need very custom jobs on them.
And that's extremely custom. And if they do what I'm asking them to do, we're going to be putting them out a little bit. So that is what that is.
So again, though, ran perfectly. All the problems are in the magazines. They are very flimsy magazines.
Even with those outside reinforcing ribs, the problem is the rib makes the magazine very stiff this way, but it does not make it very stiff that way. So while the mag doesn't want to bend like this, it is very, very easy to bend it. And if you fill it all the way up, it gets a little anaconda bend in the top of it.
It's very difficult to hamburger and very easy to hot dog those mags.
Yes. Okay, hamburger, hot dog. I get that. I get that.
So we also mentioned this gun was running steel cased ammo by Ian's request because the 145 grain Wolf was just running.
It ran great. And I'm telling you, it obturated cleanly. I didn't find any of the cases that came out that had any streaks down them. There's no lacquer on the outside of these. They're pretty much dry, and they're a lot thinner than some of the Soviet era steel case ammo. So they obturated completely. No burn marks down the sides, complete gas seal in the back. They came out clean. All the chambers look good. And the one thing I did note about that 1918 is it hurls the empties.
Oh, it tosses them.
It's more dangerous to stand on the right side of that gun than in front of it.
And we're talking about steel versus brass. We didn't mention this in the BAR, but I kind of thought of it between the segments.
Right.
There is a reason why you cannot run steel in a BAR. Did you want to cover that?
I will. And I had thought they had run it. I didn't know because I wasn't at the range. I was in hot standby back at the shop. When you eject the cartridge, it comes out of a BAR so hard it rolls around and it slaps the side of the receiver on the way out, and it would have destroyed the finish on the outside of the gun. And all of the brass that came out of the BAR had a very nice dent in the top of it, right up at the neck, where it was whacking the side of the gun, and there was a big brass spot on it. I didn't catch that. I thought we had run a steel and everything.
Any reasonably run 1918 BR is going to have like a big brass sort of marking on the one side, and that's just going to happen, which is, by the way, something that you've talked about, which is that a lot of these guns don't necessarily self-preserve their own finishes.
No.
And so there's an element of...
The finish was put on quickly and was basically irrelevant anyway.
Right. We talk about high blue in terms of beauty and things like that, but from a military perspective, it's a rust preventative. And so Mark's been on a big campaign that if you have something that's rusting to dust, maybe it's not a sin to make sure that's not going to rust. So either bathe it in oil or potentially think about refinishing it.
Well, not even refinishing it, just stopping the rust from happening. That's the conservation thing I keep beating the drum on, is stop it from rusting at least.
Yeah. So this is a big campaign of his. And so a lot of people are on either side of this issue because collectors don't like the idea of, they want patina and they want things like that. So I would urge you that if you have a patina that's just sort of sitting there as inactive discoloration, don't sweat it so much. But if you're seeing signs of active rust, give it 100 years and that will be a hole through the side of that gun.
It will be. Get them out of the stock at a minimum.
And I get it. You don't want to mess with a pristine whatever. We have an 1890 in here that's never been out of stock. But if I see signs of any sort of rust or degradation on it, it's going to have to come out in order to be preserved. So it's a delicate game. We're at a transition point in the history of these guns.
The very first gun we had in here, and I know we're off topic from an after action report, but the very first episode we ever filmed was a long Lee. It was that Charger loading Lee Enfield. And that was an extremely expensive collector grade, beautiful gun until we got it out of the stock. I'm just saying, once we got out of the stock, there were rush anchors on that thing the diameter of a quarter. It is what it is.
And then eventually somebody will pull the trigger and it'll crack, and then that'll be the end of that gun.
That'll be the end of that gun. But God, we didn't destroy its collector value, did we? No.
So take care of your stuff.
Yeah. Then we have this thing, the 8mm Show. This is an actually very controversial piece of kit in my shop. There are people that either swear by this thing or swear at it. I'm being very, very careful to hang on to it here. The number one issue that we had with this gun was 3 of these magazines actually split from use. We put a lot of hard work on this particular gun, and thank God its owner encourages that. We broke a bipod leg, which I've had to braze back on again.
Broke. I think I was the one that had it. I was doing a demo B-roll hip fire, and I just turn and I just go bop bop, and it just goes woo through the air, and I went, well, there went that. And all it was, the brazing, it just snapped loose.
It had, and the joint's only about 3/8 of an inch long. It was put on there, brazed on real quick, and from what I saw, I'm not the first guy to ever repair it either. There was that. We had issues with sights. This rear pin fits in a D-shaped hole, and there is a retention spring missing on the back of it that we discovered that was gone, and the D-shaped hole had wallowed round, which allowed this pin to come out and rotate in just such a way that the entire action tube was allowed to pop up about 1/8 of an inch. And what that did was take the trigger mechanism out of the loop, and the gun went down. So what was the real enemy? True fighters can stay in the fight. What were we truly fighting was time. We didn't have a whole lot of time. We only had 3-4 hour segments to work with before we lost Ian.
That was the most rushed 3 days, because we had him for 3 filming days, and then, to be honest with you, I slept about 2.5 hours a night.
Oh yeah, the guy was a zombie. So the question became, can we just tie wrap this and stay up? And I'm like, is the spring plug compromised? No, the spring plug never was going to come out of the gun. So all that happened was this entire tube had picked up just a little bit. Personally, if it was me and I was in combat, I'd have tied a rag or a shirt around the rear end of it and stayed in the fight. And that's what they did. So the tie wrap didn't compromise anything that had to do with the safe operation of the gun, but it was the difference between it staying in the fight and not. And if they'd have brought it back to the shop, that 2-hour turnaround is half of an available shooting day. It was not an option. And we stayed up, we stayed in the fight, and the gun did not get injured from it. So other than mags, that pin, every single stinking screw on this gun, I got 4 turns on it when it came back. Every time we have ever operated one of these shows, it has absolutely come back rattled loose. And the last thing we noted is, I actually left this set screw undone in here. The superficial resemblance of the front end of this gun to a rocket nozzle should not be discounted. But that is, we'll get a couple of close-up photos of that. That thing is nasty.
I see some copper.
And the whole inside of this, I don't even know if that'll show up. I guess I'm in focus back here.
Like the Statue of Liberty.
It looks like the Statue of Liberty is verdigreed all over the place, and that's bullet gilding. There's a pressure chamber up in here. This is a piston. And when the bolt comes to the rear, this whole piston chamber up in here can foul and hang the gun up, and it got us in Georgia. The inside of this got us in Georgia. It would get us now, except for the fact that I've cleaned it.
When you said Georgia, he means when we were hanging out with IV 8880.
Right, when we were over at Eric's place. It got us there, but we got through it. The last thing I would tell you about this, and I'm sure they're going to cover it, the one thing I said to May before she went out is if you have any malfunction on this gun, grab that bolt handle, pull it to the rear, and don't turn it loose until somebody else helps you. Open bolt operating systems are scary.
Yeah, they kind of invert your general safety programming, if you're not used to them. Now, again, we'll go back to what you said at the beginning. Probably the weirdest thing about this gun from being a collector and trying to own one is that it does basically consume its magazines, and there is no replacement for them. So careful.
You're getting right pricey.
Yeah. So Mark's exploring some reinforcement options and things like that, but basically the feed system for 8mm Lebel especially is so violent on the tips of the magazine, and these were not designed to be reused a bajillion times. You might get 1 or 2 loads out of them usually. They're designed to stamp out 10,000 more that month,
They're made by toy companies that were making the... Yeah.
So that's a problem you have later on where there's no longer a supply of those parts. But otherwise, to me, the Shosha, if you really want to compare it to a modern gun, I consider this to be the Kel-Tec of World War I.
That'll work. Kel-Tec works.
Reasonably easy to assemble, revolutionary in some ways, certainly different.
Not even bagging on Kel-Tec. That's about right.
Kel-Tec comes out with some pretty neat designs that kind of think outside the box.
You could make this
is definitely for its time outside the box. And the other thing is Kel-Tec designs guns that they can assemble. Like they're definitely trying to make a gun that they can actually build. Right. And so it's the same thing. Like you see screws everywhere, which is a sin in the eyes of any other firearms manufacturer at this time and for the next 70 years. Mm-hmm. Like until Kel-Tec, where do you start seeing people just sticking screws in the sides of guns? So, we're joking, but yeah, I mean, this is World War I Kel-Tec.
Well, if you count the screws in this weapon, including the ones you can't see, there are 23 screws in this gun.
Did you want to mention why U.S. service troops might have had problems because of the screws? Because 2 of those things aren't screws.
Okay, these 2 screws right here are not screws. They're actually eccentric cams. And what those slots do, there is a set of slots cut in the side of the plate on the inside of this. And as you rotate that fastener up and down, it slips into any one of 3 or, well, it's actually 5 predetermined slots. And this entire plate can be driven up and down, and it can be tilted. And what that sets, there's a feed block that pops up, allows the cartridge to go over it. And then as the bolt continues forward, this falls out of the way. So in the side of this piece here, there's actually a track, and we showed that track. If you go back to, I think it was Anvil 38, we actually showed that track, and it rides up and down. And once you get this thing set up right, they run pretty well. But if you put a screwdriver on that thing and crank on it, that will not hold its adjustment. You will get a horrendous failure to feed, and the gun is down.
No, it's two axes of rotation, right?
Right. There's 2 eccentrics in there.
If you loosen both of them, the statistics on trying to get it back to correct just by guessing is insane because you now have to pick 2 points.
Well, I found that it's better to actually just pick it on the amount of pressure that's on the feed block and then it drops out of the way. It's very hard to describe how I set it up, but I've got it figured. Ran.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, we didn't have any mag issues in the field.
No, this particular gun only had the separation at the rear, and then I think in the high speed, some people have noticed that it looked like it wanted a stovepipe, and on a few occasions, it did stovepipe from weak extraction. That's probably just age.
Well, it's age, and I'm going to tell you, I had to power dial down on those rounds a little bit because after watching full ball D spec rounds come out of this thing, it was absolutely baiting the terwillikers out of the gun. So
the recoil could have been worse.
The recoil could have been a lot worse. If the spring had been strong enough, it would decelerate the bolt. But I'm talking about this thing had come to the rear and it would sit there, almost like on a Lewis. Well, on a Lewis, I can explain it. You got to wait till the gas system depressurizes before the spring can start running it back forward again. So I had throttled those rounds back a little bit, and that might have been some of your extraction issue, just because I was trying to not beat the gun out of it, and that's what initiated the entire spring evolution.
I'd be curious to see if there's an ejector wear. Like, that's also just something that after 120 years, only 103 or 4 now. But,
well, it is what it is. Yeah. This is, as I described it, in Anvil 38, it's a dyslexic 3-peckered billy goat. It is what it is.
For anybody that's being made fun of for their Kel-Tecs, I will point out this gun was assembled with screws and it's still here. So, I mean, maybe
not bagging on the Kel-Tecs. They run fine.
Yeah. All right, next gun. Mark, what you got there?
That's the Silver Bullet. That is all the Alvin and the Chipmunks music that went into making this part. It's a feed interrupter from Madsen Automatic.
That is a one-off replacement for practically a one-off part for a weird Madsen that is part of a subset of Madsens that is very rare. Because our Madsen was, as far as we can tell from photo evidence, the ones that the Austrians were using, albeit with some minor differences in the stock and things like that. Mm-hmm. But that is what's considered a model 1914. Okay. And they used a very specific sort of feed interrupt to control the feed of ammunition. And it appears, and I'm not 100%, but I actually was reading about this very recently, it looks like during the Belgian trials, when they converted the Madsen to 7.65 in about 1912, 1913, they were having they could not get it to feed 7.65 properly. And I even read in the notes that what was happening, this should sound familiar to you, Mark, the gun would not jam, however, the last round in the magazine would not fire.
Right.
Sounds very familiar.
Right.
Which is what happens when this part is not there.
Right.
So
There's nothing pushing down on the last round. It's just laying in the hopper.
Right.
And it might work if you tip it this way.
Now,
it might not work if you tip it that way.
The old Madsen system, instead of this sort of like finger and thingy, right? The old Madsen system was a rolling block. Well, not rolling block, but it's a rolling cylinder that controls the feed. And so that apparently wasn't working. So they tried this. I don't know if it was specifically for the Belgian reason, but it probably was, at least as far as I've read. And then that, obviously, this is very sensitive in some ways. So they went immediately back to the old system and just improved it enough to actually work with, rimless and rimmed ammo. And so into the 50s, we see the old system. So really, this is limited to one particular subset of Madsens, and it's pretty wild. And the only reason we have this part is because our friend Alex McKenzie over at Springfield Armory National Historic Site, go visit and say hello to him.
And thank God for Alex, or I would have had no
We put out our feelers, and they were the only museum that seemed to have another Madsen in the configuration of ours. And it was also in 7mm. And
a pair of white gloves and the guts to take it apart and show me the piece.
Yes. So he said that it was not in nearly the condition that this one was in. It was apparently run very hard and put up very wet. So he did manage to fish the part out and send us a photo, and that's how we were able to develop this.
There were a lot of clues inside this gun that several machinists had tried to go after, because there's enough Prussian blue in this thing to start your own country, I'm going to tell you. This piece runs in a zigzag groove on the side of the entire rear receiver, and it was an obvious add-on. Somebody milled out of space, dropped a plate in, and as that entire rear end of that bolt's going by, this is being lifted and dropped. Now, it's only being lifted and dropped, I kid you not, about that much. It's only moving up and down about 325 thousandths of an inch between. And in fact, when I first sent this part out for Project Lightning on day one, it didn't really work all the time. They brought it back, and I made a tweak to this tab right here. I actually bent the tab up in order to make it stand up a little bit higher, and then it ran.
Yep.
And it ran. Reverse engineering at its best. Like I said, it was the Alvin and the Chipmunk show when we were making it.
But this entire part, the only thing it does
is let the last round feed.
Ensures the last round, yeah.
That's it makes the last round. It just, once the last round goes in, as the Tomahawk's coming forward to shove it into chamber, it denies the rear end the opportunity to get out of the way.
Out of the way. And it sounds like not a big deal, but the problem is without that control, you basically end up in this weird 50-50 because you have a round body that's being struck by a linear
Right, and
tomahawk,
maybe it'll do that. Maybe it'll do that.
And so if you get lucky, it doesn't, well, if you get lucky, it just, the gun shuts, the last round's sitting in the hopper.
And it's just
there. And you could technically reload another mag, but it'd be kind of wiggly. If it cuts the other way, it half feeds because it still doesn't get driven over. It still skitters.
And it tries to cut the cartridge in half.
And it jams up the whole
horrible.
And by the way, the Madsen is among the worst at clearing jams. That's something that we didn't talk very clearly about in the actual, Project Lightning.
It has to be taken apart with your index fingers, and you do not have enough power in your index fingers to clear that malfunction.
Right. With that whole big breech block there and never quite coming out of the way.
Right.
At best, you have to disassemble most of the gun to get the breech block up. And then in and under to pull the cartridge out, and then you can't lever on it too strongly because you'll snap other things at the lower assembly.
That whole gun needs to go back to a rear area to get dealt with to get out of that problem.
Which is probably why they had the whole action available as a spare part. You would just take out the whole thing, throw in the other barrel and run it, and then somebody can fiddle with it, which is a good solution in a macro sense, but in a micro sense, that's just a problem we had with the gun.
Well, I'm looking at it from a fully equipped, well-lit, tool-intensive, vice-provided stability of a shop, and it was a hard jam to clear in there.
Yeah.
So there's no way you're going to get it up in the front. So then they come up with this little gizmo, and Mr. McKenzie gave me a photograph of it, and the photograph that we had is not this part.
Right.
So then where do you start? And this was most of it. The rest of the gun was actually in fabulous condition, except for the magazines. The magazines were in a weak link again.
Yeah. Now, so the problem with the magazines on that gun is the rear tab. And I'm not even sure what those magazines are made of, so I'm not sure how we can reinforce it. But the rear tab on the magazines takes wear like nobody's business because it's essentially, I believe, brass on steel. They look like brass magazines.
They are brass mags. They have steel tabs, and on 2 of the 3 mags, the tabs have been already replaced.
Yeah.
And the one that kept fell out on me during my ep, and the one that fell out on you on a range had not been replaced.
I got so much crap for poking the release with my tummy, but it looks like that might not have been what actually
On
happened.
the intro, I held it up and it fell out because the tab has been worn almost smooth. But on the one mag we had that's been beat up so bad it's kind of sausaged, that tab had been replaced, and also the other one it had been, and those worked great. With a big tab in the front, it's a beautiful system. With the small tab, you're fiddling for it, and if you trigger the follower, it spews cartridges everywhere.
Apparently they took the advice because like Ian said, the later ones really do have a much more aggressive toe. And that fixes a lot of problems with that gun.
It does.
So otherwise, any impressions on the Madsen? I mean, this is a rare gun, Mark. Did it strike you out as being, completely unusual, or?
No, actually, it's other than the fact that the breech block's doing the swing up and down, right? It comes up for extraction, it drops down to feed, and then it comes up to lock. And it was really weird how it was timed. It was hitting the primers off center on every round, but it was closed. It was closed. It was in the right place. It just didn't look right. But from a design component, there weren't many parts in that gun. There were not many parts in it at all. And all of them appeared to be relatively wear-free. It actually comes apart in a sensical order. The only thing I would have changed about it is how they did the extractor was just really wonky, but I'm sure you're going to deal with that little flick-out extractor.
Yeah, we talked about that finger. That thing's just bizarre.
Yeah.
I guess I can't imagine what else they would do, though.
I don't think it shoots like a dream. It actually fits a normal human
it feels
being.
like a rifle. If it weren't for the vertical magazine, it feels like handling a little rifle. I love the magazine.
I can sit here and kibitz people's design decisions from 110 years ago or however long ago that was, but mechanically, it was well made. It's not a very tight gun. It's actually a little bit loose, a little bit of John Browning-ish there. After action, we had a lot of rust on it because it got wet. After action, though, that was it. It wasn't particularly dirty. It wasn't, because it's a true recoil operated gun. It has nothing. Everything's open up at the front.
It's true. When you talk about rust, there's a lot of bearing surfaces in there, and bearing surfaces are very hard to keep from rusting when they do get wet.
And I'm talking like rust after a day. I had these guns torn apart a day later.
Yeah, everything got a little bit moist during filming. We had a lot of like ambient air moisture, not really rain.
It was winter here. It was the brown season. It's brown and wetter. It's green and dry.
Every once in a while, somebody emails me and goes, "Hey, I'm thinking about coming down to Charleston. What's the? I don't want to deal with the humidity. What's the lowest humidity?" And I said, "Well, the average in February is at its lowest at 78%.
Right.
So if you'd like a cool drink of water."
Right. We don't breathe air in Charleston. We breathe low pressure steam.
Yeah. So everything did sort of get a layer of condensation at some point.
Did.
And most of the guns just wipe off and no big deal. And then we oil them later and everything's fine.
Right.
But a few where the moving parts are, the Madsen really was the most susceptible, I think, to rust.
Yeah, it was. It was. And it must have been what it was made out of, too, because all the guns were in the same environment. And it was the only one that had any rust on it.
That's wild.
Yeah.
To be fair, also, you said the Prussian blue was in there. Maybe somebody just got in there and tweaked the finish. But no, all those parts are moving so much. There's so much friction in that system.
Right.
So,
well, someone was trying to figure out why the gun didn't work, and it didn't occur to them that all the parts weren't there, and that's exactly why all the Prussian blue was on it.
They're going nuts trying to find something that wasn't there.
I had to put some metal back inside the gun in order to make it work right. I had to re-add some metal in some spots.
I believe it.
A little judicious TIG welding.
Now, it occurs to me, you did mention the off-center primer. If anybody else has a Madsen and it has off-center primer strikes, please just go ahead and pop me an email because I might have a theory. This would go back to something that our friend Bloke on the Range was talking about, which is that a lot of early primers had trouble with center strike versus side strike.
Really?
Yeah. So this is something that he found in some early Austrian designs.
It wasn't lacking any mainspring. It was clobbering the primers.
I believe Verndl's hit off center. I'm trying to remember now.
But I mean, this thing was clobber. I mean, the mainspring in this thing is enormous, and it was creaming them, so it didn't matter. I was amazed that it wasn't shoving the primer slam up through the flash hole, actually.
Okay, so Madsen covered.
Swing.
All right, so the MG0815, which is a gun that just sort of progressively got a little more bored of what we were doing as we were shooting it.
Yeah, I didn't want to play.
The problem with 0815s I have found is that they are one of the most common machine guns in the U.S. market. So round about the 50s and 60s, they got run out. Like they always have the most wear. And just like anything else, we had a beautiful 0815 on us. It was in wonderful condition for an 0815. Still has a ton of wear because it's just been shot so much more than the other stuff. 8mm was available. It was just the party gun. I don't know what it is about the 08s and the 0815s, but they're always the most used.
We got two 0815s for this exercise, and we picked the best one of the two. The best one of the two happened to be the prettiest one.
Yeah.
Its stablemate is in pieces in my shop right now, getting reevaluated for. It's going to be taken back to running, but it's just, that thing is so loose. It's kind of like a bowl of wet spaghetti noodles. I mean, it was just kind of all over the place. There's a lot of stuff going whir, bang, and piff inside of a Maxim. Yeah. There is a lot of moving parts in there.
So when you consider the 0815 and its performance and maybe its jams on this episode, I want to assure you from our observations that gun probably has 2 to 3 times more rounds through it than any other gun in this series.
Easily.
I mean, maybe 5 times. I don't know. It's got a lot more wear on it. And so the thing that I noticed is we ended up dialing up the spring tension. If we just kept the spring tension dialed up, it's not so much that it changed the rate of fire, it mostly just kept it running balanced. So a lot of that is age and slack in the springs. A lot of that is wear in the headspace. A lot of that blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, so, and you've got to slow all that reciprocating mass down at the back. And that spring, if you don't run the spring high enough, if you try to bring the rate of fire of a gun down, you can either change the mass or you can change the spring. We've got a handgun in here that somebody tried to really, really, really crank up the spring mass on in order to make it handle hotter ammo. In this particular case, if you slow down too much, all of the reciprocating mass just winds up running into the rear end of the gun and it beats the terwillikers out of it, and we're back to that. So there is a sweet spot in there that you can find where I don't think the gun's physically capable of running much harder than you were running it.
Yeah. Well,
I mean faster. Wrong word. Harder was the wrong word.
We dialed up the spring tension. It started running much better for the B-roll. So right at the end, we had some it was doing fine, and then right at the end, it started getting sluggish. And what that was is we were starting to get some fouling because the gun's a little looser, so it's got more fouling in it because it's just letting
drooling through the rear seal.
Yeah.
So there's that.
We get so much trouble for that, but the problem is nobody makes asbestos rings. And I went on 08 groups and got advice, and we tried out some of the stuff that was recommended, and it worked for a little while, but 3 days of sustained in and out is going to start.
And you know what? At the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. Those guns are not water cooled. They're steam cooled. And as long as there is water in physical proximity to the tube of the barrel, it doesn't matter how many orifices it's leaking out. As long as the jacket's full, the gun will run. And it's one of the testaments to Mr. Maxim's design that it did. So it's kind of irrelevant. We had a lot of comments about the water leaking out of the front of the 08 when we were over at 88, and it's irrelevant as long as the jacket's full.
Right.
And the only reason for the little tank is so that you don't have this big plume of steam going crew serviced weapon located here. And the gun ran. Yeah. It liked its oiled. It liked its ammo oiled.
Yeah, well, it's not so much the ammo as the feed block. Yeah. I've noticed that if you saturate the feed block with lubrication, that gun runs so much better. And again, that may be a wear issue.
Well, and when we fixed that one feed block, there's 3 things that have to slide up and down relative to each other. So there's a lot of tolerance stacking, and the round will sit there and walk side to side to where it won't even go in the chamber anymore. And if you run a lot of oil on that, it just kind of hydraulically skates back and forth. The lock that was in that gun was not the one I had worked on.
Oh.
Okay, it was not. It was the one that came with the gun. It was the one that the owner said probably works the best in his impression. It is what it is.
Yeah. And by the way, it's not that it was a problematic gun. It just had a couple more jams than average.
Right.
Again, with the supreme wear that's on those guns.
It's a testament to the fact that it ran it all.
Yeah.
And it's not that they're all knackered like that.
Not only that, but the 0815 compared to the 08, they ran smaller parts. Like they actually did scale things down to try to bring the weight down. Right. So they're trying to run it at the minimum acceptable size for some of these parts. Absolutely. And we're here 100 years later and it's still running. So
yeah, it's still running. In that, you want to talk about a gun that's walked out. That 08, we got back running again. I love it when you said we spent some time with it. Yeah, buddy.
Okay, so, Mark spent a lot of time
with it. It's fine, though. It works. It's It is. It's big. It's heavy.
You know, you had a thing that you said comparing the '08 lock to the 1911.
Right. There has to be some slop in it or it won't work at all. But the '08 lock has the very same two mortises on the side and then a T-shaped rail that it runs in, just like a 1911, runs exactly the same way. And what'll happen is the top or the bottom, either the T or the rails will wear. So when you've got a cartridge in that feed block running up and down, you've got this clamp in the back and the whole thing has the ability to do this. So it's doing this. What it's mounted to is doing this. All of the joints in the system are doing that. And there's a lot of stuff going whir bang and piff inside that gun. And yet, it really ran well.
Yeah.
Part of the oiling in the ammo might have been to do with the fact that it was very damp, and those belts do not like to be wet.
Oh no, ambient moisture was through the roof.
It was through the roof. Basically we have summer and Easter, the two seasons in Charleston, and we were creeping up on Easter, so, right?
Yeah, the other thing is that a lot of people don't know this. This is unrelated to the gun, but I think we had all of maybe 5 hours of good filmable daylight. And it kind of shows in the walking fire, I think, is where it starts to get kind of dark and we're having a hard time keeping the cameras going.
And the shadows are really long and the sun's really low on the horizon.
If we do this again, I'm going to do this at the longest day of the year. Like, it just, as much sunlight as I can get directly overhead would make it so much easier to film this sort of thing. And then some clouds, just some nice clouds to diffuse
We
the
get
light.
that cloudy bright, right? We get that diffusible, cloudy bright. The other issue is where we shoot is right where the sea breeze comes in during the summer.
Yep.
So it is always raining. Those of you in Florida know you get 4:05 in the afternoon in Orlando. It is raining because it's Thursday. You'll know what I'm talking about.
If you don't like the weather in Charleston, wait 15
Wait
minutes.
15 minutes and it'll change. So the daylight was an issue, and that was what we were truly fighting, was time. It's your biggest enemy.
All right, so I think that covers our '08, right? Other than just sort of being remarkably well set up in a manufacturing sense to be translatable to any cartridge. People love changing their '08s, '08-15s to whatever cartridge is available because the Maxim system is so easy to rebalance for a different cartridge. Like, you just pull the barrel, you change out maybe the lock, depending on
And
ammo.
then you set the fuzzy where you want it. You set the spring where you want it and go.
Yeah, you can just swap ammo. And they did that in order to produce for, every cartridge available. But now in the after effects of that is that it's so easy to swap one to another because they're all that same base model. It's pretty wild.
Well, what were they truly doing? I mean, when that gun first was invented, were they making guns or were they making money? And at the end of the day, if you want to make money, you make something universally acceptable.
What was the quote? Is that a friend of Maxim said, because he was working electrics.
Right.
And then he said, if you really want to make money, give up on this whole electrics things. Just find a way for Europeans to kill each other faster.
Absolutely.
And he's just like, well, heck, I'll go make some money. He didn't even think about making a gun.
I displayed a double barrel Manton flintlock, and my comment about that was, this is what happens when 250 years of aristocratic patronage chase an art form. That's what you wind up getting. So, and to be really honest, last thing is, I haven't really been deep down inside that gun. I didn't have enough time when it got here.
Yeah.
And I'm now going to take a very long, its owner has given me permission and has actually paid me to take a very long, deep, dark look down inside that thing.
Nice.
You will be informed.
What you got, Mark?
I have the end result of what was going on with the Lewis here. We have the Lewis's gas system in my hand.
I want to point out the miracle of the Lewis because I was the first one to wander into this, and I think I have some cell phone footage that I may be able to pop. I gotta go dig it out.
Yeah.
But essentially, when I went into this thing, what do we got here? That's
the firing pin. The fuzzy is on the rack down here. And then this is the gas piston up front that screws into the bottom of the barrel.
Right, and so that's the bleed off right there.
Yes, this is where the barrel bleed is right here.
Okay, so the problem we ran into, and we were filming B-roll, and one of our springs broke in the Lewis gun. Mark's going to fix that.
Right.
It was a big coil clock spring.
Well, here a minute. I'm going to demonstrate. I'm going to demonstrate what happened here. This is what happened.
Yeah.
That's what happened. Now, I attempted to repair that by facing the front end of this tube.
Well, hold on. Before you go through the repair, this whole thing was just carbon. And
Oh, yeah,
what
it
had
was
happened
smut.
was, and we had run this gun. This exact gun I disassembled 4 years ago.
Right.
And everything was fine. I disassembled, I photographed it. I got photos of this. And so what happened was, over the course of our firing and perhaps some firing in the years between, I don't think the owners had it out that often, this section here had not...
I have an alternative theory also that goes right along with what you're about to say.
Oh, okay. This section here had developed even the slightest crack in it. And next thing you know, the gas pressure is forcing its way out of this guy, and it's building these carbon deposits at the same time so that it roughly equaled out. So you have a gas system that's separating, and the whole time we filmed the project, the Lewis gun was leaking a significant amount of gas pressure.
A lot of gas.
Was leaking out of that Lewis gun.
You could see it coming out the cooling jacket.
Yeah. So the entire time it's happened, but we couldn't as the shooter, and that jacket actually is, the weird thing is I figured out when I was trying to figure out why I couldn't get the new spring balanced.
Right.
I took the end off to look down in here and make sure everything was fine, and I didn't take it apart that far yet, but I was just trying to see that it was tight at this nipple. And then I left the jacket off and I fired a couple rounds, and next thing I know I see actual gas blast, not from the muzzle, but from the gas system, which I could not see when that cone was on there. And so that's what made me take it all apart. So what happened is the Lewis gun was actually functioning only because the carbon buildup was holding up enough gas, because these parts were no longer connected.
Well, in our not only that, there was an enormous amount of gas erosion up inside here because the piston only sits up about here. But what we did that hadn't been done in the 70 years prior was we cleaned it.
Yes.
And that's what happened, because the gun was unclean from when May shot it.
The threading was made of
The
carbon.
threading was, well, it was rust. The threading was jumped up and it was glued together, and we committed the unforgivable sin of taking it apart. So the female threads in here have actually rotted out this way, and iron oxide occupies more space than iron. So it actually jumped the threads up a little bit, and it was fine until we committed the unforgivable sin of actually maintaining it.
Right.
So then that problem showed up.
So don't clean your gun.
No, don't do that. So then the gas key has 2 different size holes on it, and you can actually watch this gas key fall out when it was being shot the last time.
Yeah, back in the
So
day.
my answer was to take the end of this tube and face it back that way, 1.5. First we tried a half a revolution. It wasn't enough. Then we went around an entire revolution more.
And the reason for that is to try to grab some unmolested thread.
Right, to try to grab some unmolested threads. And it does draw up tight, not tight enough. It just slips out. And when I got it back the last time after we'd fired a couple of rounds, it was cracked like that.
We've tested this. When we tighten it back down with that, basically it's being held on by about 2 threads.
If it's that many.
Well, it was at first. And then what happens is we go to retest fire to see if that'll hold. And the gas system blew it right out. And now...
And the other problem is that as we faced this way, this entire gas tube moves this way. So it was coming precipitously close to falling out of the indexing ring in the back. The answer is they have provided us with an answer. This piece is just silver soldered on. So I'm going to heat that up, drop this piece off, make another piece where I've taken all of the tolerances out of it. We're going to undercut the threads. Then this gas block will all of a sudden be the right size. It'll all go back together again, and it'll run for another 100 years.
Now you're going to molest an original piece of equipment, Mark?
It doesn't work. You know what that is? That's a breaker bar right now. That is about the functionality of something you put over a wrench.
I don't know that it would actually... I think you get some bend out of it.
I'd probably. The whole point is that it's out of service. It's gone. It's rotted out. There's an entire ring burned in there. You can see from flame erosion. And the other problem was if we went back any further, now the gas piston is sitting too far forward. There's a lot of... I got to make new parts for it because the 24-hour Lewis parts store is out of gas tubes.
You don't get these at Walmart?
No.
You know, we get emails about that a lot. I have this gun that's missing this particular part. Now, for the weird thing is, welcome to the weird world of old guns.
Yes.
If you were to send me an email and say, I'm missing this machine gun part, I still won't be able to find it for you because and I've told this to 1,000 people, if not 2,000.
Yeah.
I'm not a parts supplier, and I'm going to Google it the same as you. I literally go to the same search engine you do. On rare occasion, I might be able to plug a personal contact, but that's a thing that you don't do unless you need it. You know what I mean? Like, I would need to do that for production because most of the time they're holding on to what they're holding on to because they need it.
Right.
That's more of a very personal favorite.
The insinuation is, though, that you're going to perform all of that labor and invest all that time on someone else's behalf. It's a ridiculous question.
Yeah.
The question I prefer is I found all these parts. Can you make all of this work?
Right.
Aha. So like when those firing pins were machined on a lathe in my shop because they were designed to be replaced. So rather than burning up existing new old stock,
Yeah, you just make a new one.
I made a couple more firing pins. I'll make a new end to this tube. And actually, when I'm done with it, you won't even know I did it.
But I'm sorry, this is the paradox. Not the paradox. This is the weird thing about it. If it's a machine gun, the parts are probably out there because they made extra parts for machine guns, and then machine guns got caught up, so parts ended up in the market.
Right.
But I get a lot of people that's like, hey, I have this very particular rifle from 1912.
Right.
Where can I get this part that every Bubba cut off? You know, like the 4-stock. And you go, that's it. Like if that part exists, it exists with another rifle.
Right.
Like it didn't. Nobody said I'm going to take the action out of this, throw away the action, and keep the stock. That didn't happen to rifles. With machine guns, it kind of did though, because they would take the action and cut it up, and then you have parts.
The owner of this particular Lewis wants a Lewis that runs well, and runs a lot. And I've been given carte blanche by the man to make his Lewis work, which is why I repaired his op rods, made him new firing pins.
He's invested a lot in spare parts. He wants to run his gun.
Right.
So
Unfortunately, we don't have another gas tube end in that spare parts pile.
Right.
And
He does, however, have a replacement for the press ring that goes on this guy. So
he does?
it's in there. So don't forget that while you're working.
I jumped these threads up and I kind of popped those down a little bit, and I got this connection to be very tight. And I want to save the parts. I want to save the history. But at the end of the day, consumable parts, when they built this gun, it was like over at Patriots Point. There's an aircraft carrier that sits over there, and there's a destroyer, and there's a submarine over there. And 77 years ago, when that ship was made, no one in their right mind thought they were still going to be sitting in salt water 77 years later.
Can I ask you a question? If this was the only 1915 Lewis gun in existence, would you be shooting it? Would you be playing with these threads? Would you be doing anything?
If it's the only one in existence, it's dropped below a threshold where it becomes an artifact and you can't shoot it anymore.
Right.
And that's an issue we're going to run into. Some people have these really, really pristine guns. We're going to get to the point where they can't shoot them anymore because they're the only known examples. Yeah. There are a lot of Lewises running around. If this was the only 1915 Lewis and Sir Lawrence of Arabia had carved his initials in his stock, this would not be a conversation we'd be having.
Yeah, we wouldn't be testing it.
And we sure as heck wouldn't have run it for 3 days out in the middle of the winter. Right. So all things being relative, we're going to do the maintenance and we're going to keep this thing running so that other people can enjoy it and see it. While we had it at the indoor range that one day, there were two gentlemen whose great uncles had carried these guns.
Oh, they were visiting from the UK, weren't they?
Yeah, and they got to shoot it, and that was
imagine you make a trip to America and you run into Mark and a Lewis gun at the range.
Yeah, they were crewmen on a container ship, and they were just in there blowing off some steam, and they're looking at this Lewis like they had seen, an apparition. And I'm like, no, it's a Lewis. And of course you're going to fire an entire drum out of it. Yeah.
There's only one range we really hang out with if you ever want to just check and see if you might bump into one of us.
Yeah.
Where's that at?
It's C&S on Rivers Avenue by the big Berlin's restaurant supply sign. You can
also get restaurant supplies.
You can get restaurant supplies.
Not at C&S, but up the road.
Yeah. Well, there's all that.
All right. So we covered the Lewis. I think it's time to wrap this one out.
Pretty much.
So overall, Mark, if you're the kind of man who can afford this sort of collection,
yes,
what percentage of the value of the gun is going to go into maintenance, though?
Over half.
So you buy a $20,000, $30,000 machine gun.
You're going to spend about 10 grand keeping it running over the life of the gun. You're going to spend a lot of money because there are no more. The pristine examples that don't need that level of maintenance aren't there anymore. And the deferred maintenance bill has been piling up over the years.
I've noticed that a lot of machine gun owners now are much more conscientious with it than they were 10 years, 20 years ago. But the problem is they're buying, every time we encounter a machine gun, there is a certain amount, like you'll see the current owners have done their best to clean and preserve and whatever else. But there's always some stuff that just never really got around to. And there's a lot of moving parts in their defense too. Knowing what to change. You don't want to go in there not sure of what you're doing because you can make an even bigger mess.
They're so terribly interrelated. And if you don't understand the interrelationships and you don't understand what the designers were intending when they did it, and you can go back in there and retroactively figure that out. The problem is that the number of guys that can do that is dwindling rapidly because the tribal knowledge of how machines like this work is getting, that's why I've got 8 apprentices. I'm trying like crazy, but they don't have the 40 years of experience I've had working on machines that weren't guns. So if you buy one of these things, you better go find somebody that knows how to work on them before you buy the gun. I hate to say that.
You talk about having your apprentices, you talk about your expertise. Can I point something out, which is that in all of your videos, there's people going, I'm in this field and you could do that better, and I'm in this field and you could do that better. And there's people that get downright mean about it, right? Mm-hmm. How stupid do these guns make you feel?
Well, like I said in our Q&A session, I'm the dumbest guy you've ever met. And if you're not screwing up, you're not learning anything. And this is a continuous learning curve to try to get inside the head of Colonel Shosho, for instance. Yeah. How do you get inside this man's head? You spend a lot of time. But I'm going to tell you what, these guns have never ceased to make me look like a fool. The difference is that I'm just admitting it up front.
There's a lot of guys that jump hobbies, jump professions, jump whatever because they get bored. And they end up in firearms and they never get bored again because there's just so many ways of doing something.
There's so many ways of doing it. The other issue is that if you do it your way in your trade, that's great, but you're not going to make any money at it doing it as a gunsmith.
Well, yeah, there's also an element of that because the other thing is...
It's a business.
For you specifically, well, first of all, when have we ever said that you're a perfect man? When have we ever even called you an expert?
No.
You're maintenance, you know what I mean? And the problem is everybody wants to glorify you and myself even. All I do is I read these authors. Actually, I'd like to do a big project. I want to see if I can't push some of these authors because they do the real research. Yes.
We're interpreters. We are interpreting in the real world the results of research that has been done for people that are way better than we are.
And occasionally we get our lick. We find something that's ours that we discover, but realistically, I know you guys are watching and you're not necessarily involved in this every day, but think of the amount of doubt you have at any number of tasks, and it comes into everything that we do. We don't always know how to handle every situation that comes up, and we have to learn as we go, and that adaptation is our strength. And so before you kind of get mad about, well, I know this or I know that, maybe take the anger out of it and just say, hey, I know this, I know that. Because if you come at it from a neutral standpoint, if you just say, hey man, I got some experience with this and blah, 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 you're not going to get rejected. Nobody's out to say that their ego's in this.
No, and like I said at the very end of it, I got an MP18 that runs, and that's all I can say about that.
All right. Well, thanks, Mark, for being here. Check out Anvil Gunsmithing.
And thanks for having me by. I really appreciate it.
Oh, man. Are you kidding? We've been doing this together for years now.
Yes, we have.
So if you enjoy the content, check out Mark's Patreon over at Anvil Gunsmithing. That supports him so that he can take time out of his schedule to do things like this because he could be getting paid work right now, and he's not. He's sitting here talking to you. All right. Have a good one, guys.